Hi and welcome to another Retvlog. These are my Retribution Paladin vlogs on days when, or weeks, when I don't do the live Ret Q&A, because I only do those every patch. Based on a question that someone has asked previously, so I'm taking the question from the comments from the last week's Retvlog, and it's about the Retribution Passive. So, what are the issues facing it, and what can be done to make it better? So, just to explain a few things. This was something that was introduced quite early on in the Legion Alpha. Retribution Paladins were one of the ones that got the biggest makeover, and therefore they're the ones that were available for testing for most of the time. And there were immediately several issues with Retribution Paladins in Alpha that basically all of the Retribution Paladins were saying, this is a problem, basically just bin it, will you? We had the Greater Blessing of Might problem, and that has been removed. You know, Blizzard have they eventually removed it. It went right the way through Alpha, right the way through Beta, went live, and a few months later, then they got rid of it. Should have got rid of it a long time, because the problem with Greater Blessing of Might was that you were reliant for your DPS on other players. So if you were one of the lower DPS in your group, you could benefit as long as you picked the right people to put your Greater Blessings of Might on. But if you were one of the top DPSs in your group, you'd be losing out, because by definition you can't put it on anyone better than yourself. You put it on people who are doing lower damage than you, so you are missing out. And it was factored into your overall damage. It wasn't free damage you were getting. And the same sort of arguments held with the Retribution Passive. Again, it's something that went right the way through. They changed it, of course. It used to have a much greater effect. Now it does 20% extra damage. There's 30% damage reduction. And the argument was that Blizzard, to begin with, was saying we're not factoring it in when we're looking at the damage Retribution Paladins do. Well, how can you not? It's 20% extra damage. And now they're the last thing they said about it, I should say, because that isn't just very recent, but it was a couple of months ago, I think, 2 or 3 months ago. And they stopped saying that it's not having an effect, because of course it's having an effect. And they turn to, but people aren't gaming it. People aren't taking advantage of it. Yes, they are. It's a lot of damage. Let me explain how much damage it is. So, or can be. Because again, it's very unreliable. Like on some, and I always say this, the problem with it is it makes, first of all, it can make Retribution Paladins look better on progress. Because people are dying, you're getting your Retribution pox, damage is up. You do a boss where all of a sudden people aren't dying, which is hopefully what's supposed to happen when you kill a boss for the first time. In fact, some bosses rely upon that because they're too much of a DPS check for you to be able to afford people to be dying all the time, especially unless it's right at the end. And it'll come down a lot. It'll be all of a sudden like, oh, what's happened to your damage? It's really good on progress. Yeah, people were dying then. They're not now. In fact, it's actually bit on me on the arse one time. There was a time in Emerald Nightmare where people were thinking, oh, well, there's no point in taking me because your damage is going to look really bad when people stop dying. So people actually, there's a perception they swing you the other way. They just assume it'll be bad when people stop dying. But there are plenty of fights where people die quite a lot. One of the reasons, for example, why Sisters of the Moon is such a good fight for us is not because the fight is more lethal than any other fight. It's just that you can kill the boss even if loads of people die. Which means quite a lot of people are likely to die on it. On any other boss where that many people die, you just won't kill the boss, but you can on Sisters. So what happened, I remember a couple of weeks ago I was streaming, is it was a slaughter. There were loads of people dying. You know, we've been killing it since week 2. We almost had a kill on week 1, actually. But week 2 it was that we actually killed it. Long time ago now. We've been killing it every week since. And we still have people die on it because people are trying to push their DPS. How much DPS do you do, Dad? And, but yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, loads of people died. So my Retribution Passive, it was, the uptime was about 30% on it. And the effect would have been even greater had it coincided with Crusade, for example. There's that level of RNG in there, and a few other things as well that could have benefited it. But nonetheless, 30% uptime. And that's not necessarily that uncommon. Usually it's fairly high, the uptime on Retribution Passive. And you looked at the percentile on it, and it was way above normal. You know, you look at my sort of percentiles. I'm not one for percentiles. I just do the mechanics, do the boss. Even when it's supposedly on farm. because I don't think there's any such thing as farm until you've cleared the whole instance, the whole raid. But you can see that clear jump up there. That's way better than anything else. And it wasn't that everything was going well. It wasn't that I was getting great procs or anything like that. Nothing else was unusual about that fight, other than the fact half the raid died. Throughout the fight, not all at once. Throughout the fight. Provided me with the Retribution Passive. Now, here's the thing. Think about it this way. The Retribution Passive provides you with a 20% DPS increase whilst it's active. Now, again, ideally you'd have that combined with other DPS increases such as Crusade or Potions or Heroism. But nonetheless, it's still 20% increase. Now, you have a 30% uptime on it, let's say. So 30% of 20% is 6%. So what that Retribution Passive is doing for you is increasing your damage by 6% compared to if the passive didn't exist. So imagine then two fights, two paladins exactly the same. On one fight, like the same fight, sisters, two paladins do sisters independently. Or you do it one week and then do it the next week. And on one of those fights, nobody dies. So you get no Retribution Passive. The other fight, plenty of people die. You've got your 30% uptime, 6% extra damage. 6% extra damage is a lot. How much is 6% extra damage? Well, what I did for this is I did a sim. And I put on, as I would for just a single target fight with not much movement, my shiniest legendaries for that. And I simmed my DPS. And I did another sim where I took off those legendaries and put on legendaries that don't contribute any damage. I put on Priders, I put on Aegis Yalmer, the wrist, the cheat death wrist, so contributing 0 damage there. And I compared the DPS values on a light movement fight for those. And lo and behold, what was the difference? 6%. So my best legendaries are contributing for 6% of my damage. They're increasing my damage by 6%. Exactly the same. So basically getting the Retribution Passive for 30% of a fight, which is, as I say, is not hugely uncommon on sisters, is giving you the same benefit of two best legendaries. So the Retribution Passive can be as good as having BIS legendaries. And of course it could be better. I mean, you look at some rank 1s, for example, you might find not just similar Retribution uptimes to that. Again, as I say, if it would coincide with wings, when you've got wings, and especially when you use the potion, the effect is even greater, really. So that's what the issue with it is. Just to put it into a nutshell. It is this thing that you have no control over. That's the key part of this. No control over. Other parts of your DPS, most other classes and specs would have control over their DPS. You know, they can choose to ignore mechanics to improve their own DPS. Of course, we don't like that. But that's them doing it, all right? Or they can play the class better. And that's, again, something they are doing to influence it. Or choose gear that's going to help them do more DPS. But this is based on someone else dying. Now, what can be done about it? Well, what can be done about it is really, really simple. At the moment, we have this, or we had this quandary all the way through, Blizzard wanting this class fantasy thing. Now, I have argued against this, saying the Retribution Passive doesn't even fit the Paladin class fantasy. Everyone's going, oh, of course it does. You know, you're outraged by the death of your comrades and blah, blah, blah. Doesn't everyone get outraged by that? Isn't that more fitting of a warrior? I would argue warriors could have that. But, alright, let's say you want that as your class fantasy. Again, why the damage there? Why not just keep the defensive aspect of it? The 30% damage reduction. That's fine. No one's going to argue with that. In fact, quite nice. Because whatever killed the poor soul that just gave you that proc, you might survive, you know, if it's still doing its damage. That's what I would say to that one. Just get rid of the damage component of it. So you still have the Retribution Passive. I know it doesn't make sense to call it a Retribution thing in that case. But then again, it was never huge. I didn't like the idea it was called Retribution anyway. Because it's like, what are you talking about? The spec or the passive? Call it something else anyway. And just have it as the defensive component. Because to have an offensive proc that does so, and it's so large as well, as I've just explained to you, it's just as good as having your two BIS legendaries if plenty of people die. As I say, if you get this for 30% of the fight, which, as I say, is not uncommon for people getting high percentiles. And how bad does it feel that, so, you know, you can do everything you like and you can stack everything you like, and ultimately the difference between getting a top rank if you're into ranks and not can be, have other people died. So if it's a slaughter, you're going to do better out of it than if it's not. And it's as simple as that. Solutions to problems are so simple. Problem. We've got this proc. Sometimes it'll happen, sometimes it won't. When people get better, ironically, on the fight and die less, you're not going to get the benefit. There are some fights where you can't really afford people to die, and obviously you're not going to get the benefit on those fights. You're going to be weaker on those fights, really. Solution, get rid of the damage component. Let them buff our damage by 6%. Actually, a bit more than 6% would be nice. Look where we are on the meters. But never mind. Get rid of it. Buff our damage to compensate for it. And then we can back in control of our own DPS, because this is just the same problem with Great Blessing in Mind. So those are my thoughts on it. Comments down below. Again, comments down below for what you want me to discuss next week as well. I'm going to do these each week. And then, when Antaurus comes around, once that's been out for a couple of weeks, I'll do another live Ret Q&A as well. Unless it seems sensible to do one just before it as well. That's possible. But as I say, every Saturday now that I don't do the live Ret Q&A, I'm going to do one of these, and it's going to be answering one of your questions. So thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.